Shankara Chandrasekhara Gangadhara Sumanohara Pahi Mam Parameshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara Shankara Chandrasekhara Gangadhara Sumanohara Pahi Mam Parameshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara Nilakanta Balanetra Bhasmabhushita Sundara Nilakanta Balanetra Bhasmabhushita Sundara Pahi Mam Karunakara Girijesha Omkareshwara Pahi Mam Karunakara Girijesha Omkareshwara Shankara Chandrasekhara Gangadhara Sumanohara Pahi Mam Parameshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara Tanava Priya Jaya Natesha Vishwanatha Maheshwara Tanava Priya Jaya Natesha Vishwanatha Maheshwara Pahi Mam Abhayankara Avyagra Charmambaradara Pahi Mam Abhayankara Avyagra Charmambaradara Shankara Chandrasekhara Gangadhara Sumanohara Pahi Mam Parameshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara Mrityunjaya Vishveshwara
உள்ளதலதுள்ள உணருள்ளதோ உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளலர உள்ளத்தே உள்ளதால் உள்ளமெனும் உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளலவன் உள்ளத்தே உள்ளபடி உள்ளதே உள்ளல் உணர்வாயே உள்ளே மரணபயமிக்குளாம் மக்களரணாக மரணபவமில்லா மகேஷன் சரணமே சார்வர் தன் சார்வொடுதான் சாவுற்றா சாவெண்ணம் சார்வரோ சாவாதவனித்தர் தன்னை அழித்தெழுந்த தன்மையானந்தருக்கு என்னை உளதொன்று இயற்றுதற்கு தன்னை அலாதன்னியம் ஒன்றும் அறியார் அவர் நிலைமை இன்னதென்று உன்னல் எவன் பரமா பன்னும் அதினி என்றம் மறைகள் ஆர்த்திடவும் தன்னை எது என்று தான் தேர்ந்திராது அது நான் இதுவன்றென்றெண்ணல் உரன் இன்மையினால் என்றும் அதுவே தானாய் அமர்வதாலே அதுவும் அலாத் என்னை அறியேனா என்னை அறிந்தேனா என்னல் நகைப்புக்கு இடனாகும் என்னை தனை விடயமாக்க இரு தானுண்டோ ஒன்றாய் அனைவர் அனுபூதி உண்மையாலோர் நினைவரவே என்றும் எவர்க்கும் இயல்பாய் உள பொருளை ஒன்றும் உளத்துள் உணர்நிலை நின்றிடாதுன்றின் உருவருவென்றொன்றிரண்டு அன்றென்றே சண்டையிடல் மாயை சழகுழிக உண்டியுளம் சித்தமாய் உள்பொருளை தேர்ந்திரித்தல் சித்தி பிற சித்தியலாம் சொப்பனமா சித்திகளே நித்திரை ஓர்ந்தால் அவைமையோ உண்மை நிலை நின்று பொய்மை தீர்ந்தார் தியங்குவரோ தேர்ந்திரு நீ கூர்ந்து மயல் நாம் உடல் என்றெண்ணி நலம் நாம் அதுவென்றெண்ணுமது நாம் அதுவா நிற்பதற்கு நற்றுணையே யாமென்று நாம் அதுவென்றெண்ணுவதே நான் மனிதன் என்றெனுமோ நாம் அதுவா நிற்கும் அதனாலறியா தேமுயலும் சாதகத்திலே துவிதம் சாத்தியத்தில் விதம் மோதுகின்ற வாதமது உண்மையல ஆதரவாய் தான் தேடும் காலம் தனையடைந்த காலத்தும் தான் தசமன் நன்றியார் தான் வித்து போன்ற வினை முதல் நாமாயின் வினை பயன்று உய்ப்போம் வினை முதலார் என்று வினைவி தனையறிய கர்த்தத்துவம் போய் கரும மூன்றும் கழலும் நித்தமா முத்தி நிலைதே மத்தனாய் பத்தனான் என்னுமட்டே பந்த முத்தி சிந்தனைகள் பத்தனார் என்று தன்னை பார்க்குங்கால் சித்தமாய் நித்த முத்தன் தான் நிற்காதேல் பந்த சிந்தை முத்தி சிந்தை முன்னிற்கு மூமனத்துக்கு ஒத்தாங்குருவம் அருவம் உருவருவம் மூன்றாம் உருமுத்தி என்னில் உரைப்பன் உருவம் அருவம் உருவருவம் ஆயும் அகந்தை உருவழிதன் முத்தி உணரீது அருள் ரமணன் உள்ளது 40 ஒன்று கலிவெண்பாவாம் உள்ளது காட்டும் மொழி.
நமோ பகவதே ஸ்ரீ அருணாச்சல ரமணாயா. நமஸ்காரம். உள்ளது 40 or 40 verses on reality is a work by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi, ably supported by Sri Muruganar, which contains the cardinal and central teaching of Bhagavan. It initially had 40 individual Venba verses, which were later combined together by Bhagavan and Muruganar by making those 40 individual verses into a single poem. And the meter used was Kalivenba. The first 26 verses of this poem deals with the 3 fundamental principles which almost all religions accept and use. The principles of God, world, and individual soul. World or creation, God or the creator, and the individual soul, the jiva, are the 3 fundamental principles which are discussed to some extent in the first 26 verses. And Bhagavan uses those discussions primarily to drive oneself to the cause of this worldly appearance, which is the ego or the individual self consciousness in the form I am so and so. So Bhagavan discusses the 3 principles in the first 26 verses, and after which in the 27th verse he talks about the importance of eradicating the ego or dropping the individual self to realize the state where there is no ego self. The true supreme self shines forth by itself So it's the state of existence, consciousness, and bliss. And verses 28, 29, and 30 talk about the technique of self-investigation or self-abidance. And verse number 31 onwards clarifies all the possible doubts about the technique, about what is self and what is not self-inquiry, and what is not self-realization, and finally, what is not the self-realized state. And those verses 31 through 40 is what we are going to study, not in detail in this session, but mainly we will look into the sum and substance of these verses, 10 verses, especially the intent or the purpose of these verses. So let's start getting into the verses one by one. Verse number 31, தன்னை அழித்தெழுந்த தன்மையான் அந்தருக்கு. It talks about the knower, the jnani, and it talks about the state of the self-realized knower. The self-realized knower is not an individual person. There is no individual ego self for the knower. Therefore, since there is no doer, there is no doership and no enjoyership. The individual ego self ceases to arise for a knower. In other words, knower or jnani is nothing but knowledge or the jnanam. Therefore, there is nothing more to be done for a knower, who is indeed the supreme self itself. For such a jnani, for a jnani who is in the state of supreme self, that state cannot be understood by others using mind as an instrument. That is one aspect of this verse. And the other aspect is, for the knower, there is no sense of alien existence outside of themselves. So in other words, there isn't anyone else for a knower state to be understood and communicated. There is absolutely no one else from the perspective of the knower. So the conclusion is, there is no one out there to understand and think or fathom the knower's state. Verse number 32, பரமாப்பன்னும் அது நீ என்று அம்மறைகள் ஆத்திடவும் தன்னை எது என்று தான் தேர்ந்து இராது. The purpose and proper use of Upanishadic Mahavakyas, or the profound statements, is what is being emphasized in this verse by Bhagavan. So when the Upanishad Mahavakya, for example, Tattvamasi, Adu ni, Tattvamasi, is presented to a seeker or is read by a seeker, that you are. That is what that profound statement says. When that is read by the seeker, or when that is learned by the seeker, Bhagavan says the immediate reaction to that should be, the correct response to that by a seeker should be, if the Upanishadic pronouncement says, you are that, how should a seeker respond? The seeker should respond, oh, if I am that, who am I? That should be the correct response. That is the correct response Bhagavan declares in this. So he says, no need to constantly meditate on I am that. When the Upanishad says, you are that, Tattvamasi, there is no need to meditate I am that or Aham Brahmasmi. I am that is not for meditative purposes. That is what Bhagavan is emphasizing in this verse. And he says, if one were to do that, if one were to meditate, I am that, I am that, I am that, one were to constantly think and do dhyana on that, it is only because the mind does not have the sufficient strength to investigate the self. So on hearing the Vedantic profound declarative statement, Tattvamasi, one should get into self-investigation, asking, who am I? Who the Upanishad declares as that. And the reasoning Bhagavan gives behind this is, one is already the Supreme Self. When one is truly the Supreme Self and not an individual ego self, where is the need to declare, I am that, I am that, I am that? Merely to state that, an ego feeling of ego self has to arise to state, I am that. And once that is stated, that or Brahman or the Supreme indicated by the word that becomes alien to oneself when you say, I am that. So Bhagavan concludes that there is no need to say, I am that, or think, I am that, or meditate, I am that. Simply ask, who am I? And abide in the self, in that silence. That is the proper use of the Upanishadic Mahavakyas. 33. Adubum aladu, ennai ariye nan, ennai arinde nan, ennal nagaipukku idanagum. In this verse, Bhagavan says, to say that I am realized or to say I am not realized are both equally laughable. Why? Bhagavan says, I is not an object. The true I, Supreme Self, is not an object. And therefore, there are no two I's, one knowing the other I. So one can never say, I have realized. Or one can never lament that I am not realized, because it is already a state which is eternally there. Therefore, it is laughable to say, I know myself. And equally laughable to say, I don't know myself. Because everyone's truth is that single, non-dual, supreme self-effulgence called self. That is the truth of everyone. And therefore, one cannot say, I am realized, nor can one say, I am not realized. Moving on, verse number 34. ஓர் நினைவரவே என்றும் எவர்க்கும் இயல்பாய் உளப்பொருளை ஒன்றும் உளத்துள் உணர்ந்து நிலை நின்றிடாது. Bhagavan in this verse strongly recommends eschewing debates on self-realized state. In other words, discard the debate on whether self exists or not, whether it has form or not, and whether it is a non-dual or not. Essentially referring to the various tenets of various religions based on duality and non-duality. He says, do not engage in debate. Instead, abide in the natural supreme self. 35 deals with the attraction one may get out of all the miraculous powers as one proceeds through this path of self-inquiry and self-investigation. As the mind focuses more and more and more into one's own true nature, and mind kind of weans itself out of its own grip, it acquires sometimes some miraculous powers. And Bhagavan is strongly recommending that such attraction and attention to miraculous power should be avoided. And he gives a reasoning for that. He says all miraculous powers are like crowning accomplishments within a dream. So what happens to the miraculous achievements and accomplishments in a dream? They vanish into thin air when you wake up. Similarly, any accomplishments in this worldly existence as an individual jiva, which by itself is apparent and illusory, will all vanish when one wakes up. Therefore, discard them. 36. Kurnu mayal namudal endru ennil nalam namadu vendennumadu namaduai nitpadarku natrunaye. Again, Bhagavan comes back to the Upanishadic Mahavakya. I am Brahmasmi, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. And he says, I am that or Aham Brahmasmi thought, as a thought, may be a useful aid for a seeker of that, the truth. For a seeker of truth, that thought, I am that, may be useful as an aid, but is it really needed? So he recommends or teaches that there is no need to think I am that supreme self. And he gives a similar analogy or example. Even a man as an individual self or a jiva does not keep thinking or repeating, I am a man, I am a human being, I am a man all the time. So where is the need of repeating or repeated thinking of I am the supreme self or I am that? Because self eternally abides as self. Since I exist as self all the time, even while I am mistaking myself to be the body, or I am mistaking myself to be an individual, even at that time, I exist only as self. So where is the need of thinking that I am the self? Bhagavan says it is not needed, even though it may be an aid to pull oneself away from the attraction of the worldly existence. Verse number 37. Ariyade muyalum sadagattile duvidam satyatil attuvidam. Bhagavan talks about in this verse and categorically declares that duality is never true or never real at any time. Some schools allow a little bit of leniency for those who want to establish duality is true. And these moderate schools say that at least while doing the practice, one may allow the reality of duality. And on attainment of self-realization, they accept that non-duality is the truth. Bhagavan negates it. Bhagavan says no. Even during the practice, duality does not have any real existence at all. So non-duality is, and never the duality is, the eternal truth, Bhagavan declares. Both during practice and on realization, just like the 10th man was never missing. The analogy used in this verse is the example of 10 people crossing a river, and one is thought to be missing, but they are on investigation, they find that the 10th man was never missing. Similarly, Bhagavan declares that duality is never true. Only non-duality is true all the time. That is the only reality. Verse number 38 talks about action and karma. All three karmas drop completely when doer vanishes, with ceasing doership and enjoyership. So, Vinay Mudal Namayin Vilai Payan Tuipom. 38, verse number 38 declares that all three karmas drop for a knower because the doer ceases to exist, ceases to arise. On inquiring who's the actor or owner of an action and realizing the true self, all three types of karma fruits drop off. Karma phalas, or the fruits of actions, drop off. So this categorically again teaches that not just two, but all three karmas drop off. Because those who think jnani or knower is still a body or an individual, like most of us consider Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi to be a particular frame or a body which came into existence in late 1800s and attained Samadhi or Mahanirvana in 1950. So we strongly think, most of us think, that that body and that person, individual, is Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, even though he was always saying that no, this body is not Ramana Bhagavan. So his teaching itself repeatedly was that this particular body is not the real self. So since we think, many of us may think that only two kinds of karmas drop off, that is the agamiya karma and sanchita karma, and not necessarily the prarabdha karma. The body and the mind still has to go through all the prarabdha karma which brought the body into existence, and they have to be exhausted. That's what we may think in continuation to our belief that the individual continues to be there as knower continues to be there as an individual. Bhagavan says no. All the three type of karmas drop off because there is no doer anymore. Therefore, the doership and enjoyership also drop off, and there are no karmas attached to the knower anymore. Verse number 39, Mattanai, Battanan ennumate bandamutti sindanaigal. When bondage is found illusory, both concepts of bondage and liberation vanish. Both the concepts of bondage and liberation drop off on inquiring who's bound and realizing that there was never any bondage. So he concludes here that the issue here for a practitioner is that they continue to think that they are practicing and they are an individual engaging in self-investigation practice. And Bhagavan says, as long as you think that you are that individual who is bound and you are doing a practice to get out of the bondage, it is going to be difficult for you to see your true state or be in your true state. So he is questioning, are you the one who is in bondage? Is the bondage real? And if you question and find out that true self, which is never bound, then both the concepts of bondage and liberation drop off. Final verse, number 40, Uruvam, Aruvam, Uruvaruvam, Mundram, Urumutti, Ennil, Uraipan. Liberation is a state without the ego self that engages in useless debates on the state of liberation. So the idea here is, do not waste your time by engaging on debates about the state of liberation. Is the state of liberation with form or without form? Or is it sometimes with form and sometimes without form? Such debates are useless because the one which is debating is the ego self, and the state of liberation is without the ego self. So destruction of ego self, which wastes its time discussing the nature of the state of the egoless self. So the egoless state of self-realization or liberation is not something which can be discussed and debated upon and concluded upon by the ego self itself. So Bhagavan teaches that we should not waste time on that. Concluding two lines were written by Sri Muruganar after the 40th verse, which essentially says all the 40 verses were put together in a Kalivandba meter to make it a single poem teaching the single truth, which is the self. And it is blessed by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.
नागेन्द्रहाराय त्रिलोचनाय भस्माङ्गरागाय महेश्वराय नागेन्द्रहाराय त्रिलोचनाय भस्माङ्गरागाय महेश्वराय नित्याय शुद्धाय दिगम्बराय तस्मै नकाराय नमः शिवाय मन्दाकिनी सलिलचन्दनचर्चिताय नन्दीश्वर प्रमदनाद महेश्वराय मन्दारमुख्य बहुपुष्पसुपूजिताय तस्मै मकारमहिताय नमः शिवाय शिवाय गौरीवदनाब्ज वृन्द सूर्याय दक्षध्वरनासकाय श्रीनीलकण्ठाय वृषध्वजाय तस्मै शिकाराय नमः शिवाय वसिष्ठ कुम्भो पवगौतमार्य मुनीन्द्रदेवार्चिदशेखराय चन्द्रार्कवैश्वानरलोचनाय तस्मै वकाराय नमः शिवाय। यक्षस्वरूपाय जटाधराय पिनाकहस्ताय सनातनाय दिव्याय देवाय दिगम्बराय तस्मै यकाराय नमः शिवाय। पञ्चाक्षरमिदं पुण्यं यः पठेत् शिवसन्निधौ शिवलोकमवाप्नोति शिवेन सह मोदते।